In regions where wetlands stretch endlessly beyond the horizon, where the air hangs thick with humidity, and where the water behaves like a soft, reflective mirror under patches of gentle sunlight, Psyduck lives in absolute stillness. On the surface, Psyduck is an unassuming creature, round, yellow, slightly stiff in posture, and constantly rubbing its forehead as though each moment is weighed by confusion. Yet behind that odd expression lies something remarkable. Psyduck carries within its head one of the most mysterious biological systems ever observed in a Pokémon, an internal sensory mechanism that detects disturbances in nature before they reveal themselves. For generations, researchers in the Pokémon world have been fascinated by Psyduck because its chronic headaches are not random, nor merely physical discomfort. Instead, these headaches are believed to be part of a deeply rooted evolutionary adaptation. Long before storms arrive, long before tremors shake the ground, and long before subtle changes ripple across waterways, Psyduck is already aware. Its head pressure rises, its eyes widen, and its movements slow down as if its brain is processing information the environment has not yet revealed. In the wild wetlands where Psyduck gathers, the first indication of disaster never comes from wind, rain, or visible land movement. It comes from the way Psyduck reacts collectively. Often, observers notice that the strongest Psyduck, usually older than the rest, stops moving. It stands still in silence, watching the sky. Seconds later, others mimic that posture, forming what looks like a frozen chain of yellow bodies scattered along the lagoon's shallow edge. Their palms pressed tightly onto their heads, not out of pain alone, but because their sensory input becomes overwhelming. The air pressure shifts before storms. Electromagnetic tones vibrate faintly through the environment before earthquakes, and the subtle movement of underwater pressure can be felt days before tidal swells rise. Psyduck reads all of it instinctively, involuntarily, and with an intensity that overwhelmed researchers when they first witnessed it. From a biological perspective, scientists began to compare Psyduck to animals in the real world. There are elephants known to run inland hours before a tsunami hits. There are dogs who grow restless minutes before tremors shake the earth. There are birds who fly away from coastal areas before hurricanes form. The explanation, in nature, often lies not in mystical abilities, but in atmospheric sensitivity. Many wild animals detect changes in air pressure, shifts in low-frequency sound, or vibrations beneath the soil long before humans ever notice. Psyduck, it appears, functions in the same way, except the detection does not remain subtle. Psyduck does not merely sense, it reacts neurologically. Its brain enters an overload state, translating sensory input into intense, disorienting headaches. This pain becomes a signal, a biological alarm for both Psyduck and its surrounding group. What happens afterward is astonishing. Minutes before heavy rain or floods, Psyduck begins relocating. Sometimes it forms a single cluster floating closely together on the deepest part of the lagoon. Sometimes they begin walking in a crooked line across damp soil, following no visual cue, but moving as though an invisible magnetic field channels them forward. They are not running, not panicked, but rather migrating with surprising accuracy. They reach elevated wetlands, distant reed fields, or patches of forest canopy where groundwater cannot rise too quickly. Observers once doubted what they saw, assuming coincidence. But after witnessing the same phenomenon hundreds of times across multiple geographical pockets, the conclusion became undeniable. Psyduck migrates precisely before storms occur. When researchers began documenting their movements, they tried to measure accuracy. The results were staggering. Hours before thunderstorms, Psyduck clustered in groups, forming high ground positions. Before unexpected earthquakes, Psyduck froze completely, rubbing their heads as though electricity jolted behind their eyes. When tidal surges or heavy floods approached, Psyduck moved inland, forming tight formations behind the oldest members. This behavior is not sporadic. It is consistent, patterned, and historically reliable. Based on biological theories, the leading explanation is that Psyduck has an oversensitive neural system tied to atmospheric frequencies and ground vibrations. Real scientists once conducted experiments with pressure sensors around regions populated by Psyduck. Whenever the barometric value shifted sharply downward, Psyduck responded before machines registered results. When water pressure surrounding lake beds fluctuated, something often preceding seismic activity, Psyduck instantly stiffened and pressed their heads. One researcher described it as watching nature speak through them. It is believed that Psyduck carries a sensitive internal equilibrium organ similar to the inner ear systems found in fish, amphibians, and some mammals. But unlike typical sensory systems, Psyduck's organ connects directly into neural pathways responsible for psychic energy output. Because this psychic energy is unstable in its juvenile form, it expresses itself as pain. This pain triggers survival behavior, not only for the individual Psyduck, but for the entire group. And that is what truly sets Psyduck apart from ordinary creatures. When threatened, Psyduck does not protect itself alone, it alerts others. Younger Psyduck gather tightly around the elders, mirroring posture. The leader then directs motion not with vocal communication, because Psyduck rarely vocalizes, but with spatial behavior. If one steps forward, the rest follow. If the leader stops abruptly, all remain frozen. This creates a synchronized escape sequence that happens seconds or minutes before danger unfolds. Imagine watching this in nature. An open lagoon, still water, soft wind dragging ripples across the surface, birds chirping quietly, and then, from nowhere, an entire line of Psyduck begins moving in silence. No panic, no sound, just instinct. Hours later, a violent storm arrives, flooding the ground they once occupied. That is the phenomenon that fascinates wildlife researchers. Psyduck, despite being perceived as weak, lost, or confused, demonstrates survival intelligence far exceeding expectation. When lightning storms destabilize air pressure patterns, Psyduck does not wait. When rising tidal pressure hints at floods along low-ground marshes, Psyduck does not hesitate. When seismic waves shift beneath roots, Psyduck senses them. Their heads throb, and rather than endure the pain standing still, they begin relocating. This has led to fascinating ecological consequences. In regions where Psyduck populations exist, other Pokémon follow them unintentionally. Seedot and nearby trees jump down and migrate alongside them. Small bug-type Pokémon gather behind the groups. Some water dwellers move upstream, mimicking Psyduck's directional decisions. And occasionally, even larger creatures like Poliwag or Lotad anchor themselves among groups of Psyduck for safety. Psyduck, accidentally, becomes a natural environmental siren, guiding not just its own family, but entire micro-ecosystems into safer zones. Scientifically, Psyduck resembles a biological early warning system, an animal analog to geological sensors. People once believed its headaches meaningless. Today, researchers call them neurological storm detection responses. This extraordinary sensitivity leads to an evolutionary path. When Psyduck matures mentally, physically, and psychically, the painful overload disappears. The internal pressure stabilizes, and when it evolves into Golduck, its perception becomes calm rather than overwhelming. Golduck still detects atmospheric changes, still senses water shifts, but instead of reacting in panic, it reacts with control. Its movements become targeted rather than instinctual. Its leadership becomes intentional rather than coincidental. Where Psyduck runs to escape, Golduck travels to guide. This transformation mirrors real biological development observed in nature. Young animals rely heavily on instinct. Mature ones coordinate actions with cognition. Psyduck feels disaster. Golduck understands disaster, and therein lies the beauty of their life cycle. Psyduck teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness. Sensitivity can be biologically advantageous. Pain can hold purpose. Their headaches are not disorder, they are signal. And those signals preserve life. Through a scientific lens, Psyduck is astonishing. Through a behavioral lens, Psyduck is inspiring. Through the natural world, Psyduck becomes the hidden messenger of environmental change. As long as wetlands survive, Psyduck will continue sensing the pulse of the earth long before danger becomes visible. And long before storms darken the sky, Psyduck already knows. That is their story. And it is proof that nature, whether fictional or real, often hides extraordinary abilities in the creatures we least expect.